All right, hello everybody. Welcome to the deltaDNA webinar series. Today we're going to talk about the measure charts. So let's go into our Delta Crunch game again, just like so. So the purpose of the webinar today is to go through, we'll try and go through most of the charts and explain sort of what they're telling you and how you need to set up your data to make them work, as well as try to cover some new functions we put into the measure that you might not know about. So we'll just start here on the summary page, as I said. So I'm sure most of you have looked at these charts before. So we have, this is sort of our hand-picked most important charts for you to look at. Things like active users and the numbers of new players. There's some revenue charts, and at the bottom is the number of events. At the top here, we have our filter bar. What this allows you to do is configure the charts to just show you things you might be interested in. So we have there's the date range here, and it's a player start date range here. One of the things which is new for release 11 is that we now allow you to have a relative date. So in the past you had to actually put fixed dates, whereas now you can choose the previous 31 days or the previous 7 days, and that will just automatically look at the last month or the last week of data. It knows what today is, and so it just gives you the last month, and so it makes it very easy to just always pick the last week or the last month of data that you might be interested in looking at. Let's make this the last week just for fun. So now we're just looking at the data that came in the last week. One thing to keep in mind about the filter bar is that the dates only filters on the event. So it's just looking at data which has come in over the last 7 days, but it's not filtering at all on player start dates. So we see that these active users includes a lot of existing players as well as new players. Of course, we can filter the player start dates in the same way, and then we'd only be looking at the new players. So let's clean that out. Okay, the other filters you can use are age, gender, location, acquisition channel, and platform. The way that these get populated is that if we see any values in your events that come in, so if you fill in the user age field or the user gender field or the location, the user country field or the acquisition channel field, in any of your events, we'll populate that up into the tables which drive these charts, and then you can use them to filter. So if you just tell us, you only have to tell us once any of this information, and then we'll make sure it's available here on this filter bar for you to then filter the users according to that. And you can filter by anything that you send us. So here for Delta Crunch we have a range of platforms, and we have a range of acquisition channels, and sort of what you would hope that you'd have this information coming in from your game, so that you can slice and dice a little bit on this page to see what's going on in your game. The other things up here at the top are segments, which I'll talk about now, and annotations, which I won't, except to say that we'll cover annotations at the end, but basically what that allows you to do is put some notes on the charts. But we'll talk about segments. So the other thing you can do is you can filter by any segments that you've created. So there's some preset segments that we populate for you, like spenders or engage players, but of course any of the segments you create in the segmentation tool are available here for you to use. And when you filter, so say we pick spenders and we update, now the charts are just going to show the people who are spenders. Now there's an interesting thing here which some of you may have spotted, which is that even though I've selected spenders, the total percent spending is only 82%. And that's an interesting result, because the reason for that is that we've got the date range set as the last 7 days. So only data which has come in over the last 7 days is considered in these charts. But our spender segment is anyone who's ever spent. So actually what this is saying is that 82% of the people who've ever spent have done so in the last 7 days. Okay, so let's get rid of that. I'll update it. So just to go through the charts now. So at the top we have kind of fairly straightforward ones like the active users chart and the new player chart. One thing to keep in mind about the new player chart is that this simply counts how many new player events come in on a given day. So if you're not using the new player event, or if you have some issues with the new player event, it's not firing properly, or it's firing more than once for a user, this chart won't be accurate. It's completely linked to the new player event. So if you want this chart to work, you need to make sure you send the new player event in properly, which it will for anyone using the mobile, so iOS or Unity SDKs. All that should be taken care of. But of course, if you're using REST API or some other configuration, then there's problems potentially there. So we now have the revenue charts. So the total revenue is the total revenue we see on any of these days. The way we calculate the revenue is to use what we call the converted product amount, which comes in your transaction event. The converted product amount is whatever real currency we see on a transaction converted into your currency of choice. So when you set up your account, you would have chosen a currency. I believe the default is US dollars, but you can choose any currency that you like. And then we'll populate this chart with everything converted into that currency for you. So for Delta Crunch, it's set up in US dollars. So these are all transactions in all different types of currencies converted into US dollars. The other thing about the revenue charts is that we will attempt, if you're on iOS and you have revenue validation switched on, we will filter out all the invalid transactions. So and if anyone's doing any IAP hacking in your game, we'll attempt to get rid of that if we can validate your transaction receipts against Apple's servers. Unfortunately, that's not possible for Google. So for Android, that will appear in these charts, or any other platform where we can't do revenue validation. So the other ones here, we have percentage spending per daily active user. That's going to be the percentage of people that played on that day, how many of them were spenders. We have the average revenue per daily active user, which is, of course, just the average, this revenue here divided by the DAU. We have what we've called now our all player retention chart, which is the retention for all users, including existing and new players. So it's essentially, if you think about day one retention for the all player retention, it's the fraction of people who played. It's the fraction of people who played today and yesterday, or of the people that played yesterday, it's the fraction that played again today. And similarly, the 7-day retention is of all the people who played 7 days ago, how many of them played today? And then once you consider these dates, it's that same calculation for any of those dates. So say if you take the 27th of January, the 7-day retention on the 27th of January is the ratio of the people that played on the 27th of January and also on the 20th of January to all the people that played on the 20th of January. Finally, there's a total events on the bottom. This tells you the total number of events that we've processed from your game on any of these days. It's quite useful because it can tell you if there's some disruptions to the flow of data coming into our system, or if if you have some problems with your data, then maybe you'll see spikes or drop-offs here. And of course, new versions of the game which come with new events you'll see changes here. So let's keep moving through the measure pages. So the next block of charts we have is retention. So a lot of these are repeats from the front page. So we have the active users and the retention, the all player retention again. The one which is different is the stickiness. So the stickiness is the DAU on the MAU. And the idea is that that's giving you kind of a rough measure of what your retention is. So it's saying, if you had 100% stickiness, that would mean that all of your players played every day in a month. So everyone who played on any given day played on every day of that month. So 100% stickiness would be very, very, very high retention. Of course, lower values of stickiness mean that people are not coming back more than once. And what you typically see with stickiness is values between 10 and 20%. So it means your MAU is sort of 5 to 10 times bigger than your DAU. So the next ones we have a playing speed. I'm not sure how many people use these charts. They're not particularly useful unless you send in lots and lots of events, because what they are is essentially the number of events we see per second. And so, for most games, you'll send in events maybe, events that have some meaning, like mission start events or mission complete events or game started events. But of course, the players are doing stuff inside those missions, and so depending on how long the missions are, you'll get different values of playing speed. So these charts are not super useful, but of course, if you're sending in loads and loads of events, then you can start to look at how many players are playing at different speeds in terms of the number of seconds per event. We have some sessions charts. So what the session charts are showing you is on any given day, for the players that played on that day, how many sessions have they played? So in this example, so players by session played. Here, what we're seeing is that, say, on the 27th of January, there was 500 people who played one session. There was 1,376 players who were on their second or third session. There was 1,569 players who were on their fourth or fifth session, and there was 2,500 players that are on their 6th to 10th session. So it's telling you basically the breakdown between experienced players and novice players on any given day. And similarly, you can see the spenders by session played. So this doesn't quite work for Delta Crunch because the data is not set up quite properly. But again, this would be the same as the players, but now it's just showing you your spenders, the distribution of sessions on any given day. And here we're looking at the total number of payments on a day broken down by what session number people are in. And similarly for revenue. Finally, you have the total revenue by sessions played, which is just binning up how much revenue has come from players that are on different session numbers. And so here we can see that the most revenue has been generated by people who play the most, which makes sense. Okay. So the last two things we have in retention are the all player retention matrix and the new player retention matrix. So for people who have been around for a while, they'll note that this one, the all player retention matrix, used to simply be the retention matrix. We've now called it the all player retention matrix because we have another one which I'm going to show you in a sec, but I'm sure a lot of you have seen this one already. So what this shows you is it compares essentially the frequency of play with the recency, and so you have the number of days played at the top and the number of days since last login on the left. And so if people have only played one day, essentially that means that they've churned. So if they're sitting here in this column, they've only played one day and they haven't been seen for many days, that means that they're unlikely to be coming back. Similarly, we'll change this so we can actually get a bit more data in here. So if you have a bit more data, it's a bit more obvious. So you can see the big numbers of players here are players at different parts of their life cycle. So up in the top corner here, we have people who have only played one day, but there's been one day since we've seen them. So basically, they were new players yesterday. If we look down the bottom left, we'll have people that only played one day, but haven't been seen in a week or 2 weeks or even a month. And they're essentially our churned players. And you can say that basically anyone down the bottom left here, you can define some criteria for yourself, but basically if people have played only a couple of days and they haven't been seen for a long time, it's likely that those players have churned and are not going to come back to the game. And so you can add up these numbers down here to give yourself an understanding of how many players you're losing. And this is kind of analogous to your sort of day 1 or day 2 or day 7 retention. The nice thing about the retention or the all player retention matrix is it can also show you how many people are engaged. So up in the top right, you'll have people who've been seen many times. So this 7 or 8 to 14 or 15 to 21 means that these players have been seen on 7 or more distinct days. So they've played the game on 7 separate days or 8 to 14 separate days. And if they're up here in the 1 or 2 days since last login, that means that their last session happened very, very recently. So these are your engaged players. So what's quite nice is you can draw your own criteria for what you want an engaged player to be. But if you say someone's played more than maybe 5 times and they've been seen in the last couple of days, you can add up these numbers to give you an idea of how many of your players are becoming engaged and really getting into your game. And it gives you an idea of, you can balance off how many sort of healthy engaged players you have with how many players are churning straight away. So our new player retention matrix. So the new feature here is the new player retention. And here in this tab, you can see both the new player retention chart and the new player retention matrix. And here what we're seeing is the retention, but just for new players. So the definition here is that on a given day, you're looking at, for all the people that installed on that day, what fraction of them played after 1 day, after 7 days, after 14 days. So for example, in this setup, on the 31st of December, all the people that installed on the 31st of December, 27% of them played 1 day later, and 15% of them played 7 days later. So in contrast to our all player retention, which is sort of backwards looking, this is a kind of forward looking retention. You're cohorting by player install date and then looking to see when do people come back. So we have the chart here, but we also have the matrix, which would be quite familiar for anyone who's used Flurry or other tools where they have a matrix like this. And here what we have is the install date. So these are the different dates when players installed, and this is the number of people who installed on that date. And what we can now see is what number of people came back however many days after install, 1, 2, 3, up to sort of 14 counting, and then 21, 30, 60, and 90. You can see the raw numbers here, or you can toggle to see the percentages, and then now we're looking directly at our day 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. retention across all of the install dates that we want to look at. And of course, you can control that at the top by choosing 31 days or 7 days or any date range that you like. Of course, 7 days is a bit too short to populate this very much, but so this is a good way to see if your retention is changing a lot, if there's good days, if there's bad days, for players to install on. To go down a bit more. And as well as how players are sort of progressing through their lifetime with the game. So you're seeing a big drop off at the start, or is a very large fraction of players sticking with the game over a long period of time. Okay, so that's the retention charts. Let's move on to the monetization charts. So here we have the monetization charts, or the revenue charts. Again, we see the total revenue. This is the same as on the summary page. Same for the average revenue per daily active user. The new charts that are unique to this page are the revenue per daily spending user. So this is telling you what's the average amount spent for everyone who spent on a given day. So for instance, here we can see on the 13th of January, the average for everybody who spent was $6.50. We can see the total number of unique spenders on a given day. The percentage spending per daily active user, this is the same as on the summary page. And then the average number of payments per player, which of course will be quite low because most people don't pay. Or we also have here the average revenue per transaction, which is just telling you what's the average amount spent on each transaction. And then finally we have some demographics, so the spenders by age. So on any given day, how many people fell into each age bracket? Split by gender, so how many of each gender type were paying on a given day, and then finally which countries did your spenders come from. And of course, in contrast to these other charts, this country page is taking everyone within a date window, which in this case is the 31 days, or the previous 31 days from today. So that's revenue. I'll just skip over first payment actually because it doesn't really work for Delta Crunch. Again, I mean, one thing I should have said at the beginning is that I'm sure many of you have looked at our Delta Crunch game in the system. The way that Delta Crunch works is actually all the users in Delta Crunch, or the vast majority of users in Delta Crunch, are fake. They're bots that we built to populate the database with some meaningful data. And so while for the most part they look like, they sort of behave like real players, there's some things which don't quite work, and some of the time-based things don't work very well. But and this is an example of that. But so if this was a real game, you would be able to see on any given day what was the breakdown, similarly to the other charts which have sort of multiple lines. What was the breakdown in players by time to first payment, and similarly revenue by time to first payment, and total revenue. But unfortunately, that doesn't work for Delta Crunch. So we have the player value charts. So this shows you for anyone who played on a given day, what was the breakdown in their current value. Most people are not spenders. That's why a huge number of them are in this 0 to 1 bracket. But then, you can see the breakdown of the other people in the higher value and lower value brackets. Of course, it makes more sense to look at the spenders only, and then here, that's what we're seeing on the second chart. So you can see this tiny little group of lines is expanded out on this second chart. So it's a bit more meaningful, and you can see where players of different value lie. I should point out this is their total value to date. So what we're looking at is the distribution of, on any given day, how much were each person, what was the cumulative value of the players up to that point in their life. So we have the spenders and the total number of payments by current value, as well as the revenue by current value. And then what's possibly more useful is the total revenue by current value. So where is most of your money coming, most of revenue coming from? Is it coming from lots of little spenders, or is it coming from a sort of middle class of average spenders, or is it all coming from whales? So in Delta Crunch, we can see that the most of the revenue is coming from sort of a middle class of players that are spending between $20 and $50. So not sort of lots of little tiny transactions, but not lots of not a few very big spenders. So finally, in monetization, we have the monetization matrix. So this is set up a little bit like the retention matrix, where we have the number of transactions on the top and the total revenue on the left. And so the idea here is that you can see how many transactions does it take to get to a certain amount of revenue from a player. So here, so say we take this cell of 31, what we're seeing is that these 31 players did between 6 and 10 transactions, and they've spent in total between $25 and $30 and $40. So the idea here is you can see how many transactions do you need to plan for to get to a certain amount of revenue, or basically a certain amount of ARPU, right? An average revenue per paying user. It's clear that if you just have one transaction, it's very hard to generate a lot of revenue. So nice to know how many transactions you need to get to a sort of reasonable amount of spend from spending players. And that's the idea behind this this matrix. There's other simple numbers you can get, so you can see sort of your breakdown of payments. So here at the bottom, basically, we're just seeing the distribution of players in terms of numbers of transactions. So 25% of spenders make one transaction, 20% make two. And so it'd be nice, a healthy sign is to see that when people spend, they spend more than once. So it wouldn't be nice if all your spenders only spent once. But this is a good way to diagnose that. Okay, so moving from monetization, we have our game dynamics charts. So these are, at the top of this, we have players. So again, we have the new player chart, which is the same as the one on the summary screen or summary page. We have the event distribution. So this is basically saying how many of each event did we see on a given day. We have the total events again, and we have the events per unique user. So this is telling you what the average number of events you're sending us per user is. We also start to have breakdowns, so how your players break down on any given day in terms of age, in terms of gender, and finally in terms of country. So this is how many players we've seen from each country across the date range you select in the filter bar. We have an items and mission page. So this page is slightly dependent on how you configure your events. So the items bought will tell you how many items people have bought on a day, but this relies on you sending transaction events with the item fields set up. If you put your item transactions in some other event, we won't be able to track them into this chart. So it's important to use the transaction events the way we've templated them to drive this chart. Similarly, the top 10 items relies on seeing these item names in the transaction events, so we can tally them up and show you which items are being bought the most. And this includes both virtual currency transactions and real currency transactions. We have the missions chart, which is basically showing the breakdown of how many missions have been started, completed, and failed. If you bring in the legend, you can see the colors are mission starts, mission completes, and mission fails. Again, this requires you to send the mission events in the way that we would template them. But this is good because it tells you sort of some idea of how many missions are getting started and how many are being completed and failed. We can also see some information about that on the difficulty chart, which is at the bottom, which I'll explain in a sec. But the next one we have here is a top 10 missions. So this will be if you have a linear game. So in other words, if you do your missions one by one, this will essentially be like a mission funnel. If not, then it's going to tell you which missions are the ones which are most played. And again, this is using the information that you pass in the mission name parameter on mission events. Finally, we have the difficulty and frustration. So the difficulty is the number of mission fails over the number of mission completes. So, a high value of this would mean that, 100% fails on completes would mean that people are failing half their missions, basically. So that's probably not good. The one thing about this chart is that it considers all missions. So most of the information is probably coming from the first couple of missions, which most people play. But it's giving you a good feel overall for how difficult or frustrating your game is. We don't have frustration in this one, actually, because Delta Crunch doesn't have mission abandoned events. But frustration is the count of mission abandoned events over mission completed events. And difficulty is mission failed over mission completed. Okay, and finally in the charts we have social. Again, this is another page which really requires the data to be set up in a certain way. So for the gifting charts, you need to be using the gift sent and gift accepted templated events. And similarly for the invite sent, you need to be using the invite sent or invite accepted templated events. Social events as the social ones, sometimes to say social events as a percentage or social play as a percentage, are simply adding up those 4 events. So anyone who does any of those 4 events will be included. The one thing we're working on at the moment is to add a social connect event. So you can see if people simply connect to a social network like Facebook or similar. Because of course that's an interesting number to have. But because we know the number of gifting players and inviting players is quite low, but possibly 30 or 40% of people might connect to a social network. But anyway, so you can see we have these gifting and invite charts which tell you just the sort of volumes and percentages of players that are engaging in these things. As well as at the bottom we have a K factor chart, which is simply the number of invites accepted. No, sorry, it's not percentage of invites accepted. That's the percentage of invites accepted that are sent. The K factor is the number of accepted invites per player, I think. Something like that. Sorry. What does it say? I did know this, but my brain's just gone blank. Okay. So it's the for every one person that comes into the game, how many extra people do they bring? So in this case, for players that were playing on the 20th of January, for every one of them, their invites added up to an extra 1.3% of players. Okay, so that's all of the charts. I'll quickly talk about the tools down the bottom here, but I was wondering if there's any questions about any of the charts which people would like to have answered at this point while we're still talking about charts.
No questions so far, Isaac.
Okay.
Just give them a couple of minutes just to type them out.
Okay. So that's our full list of charts. We have some tools down the bottom. I talked a little bit about it before, but in the tools we have annotations, which I'll show in a sec. we have the cohort comparison, which I'll show, but basically that's allowing you to take two sets of filters like this and set up sort of charts next to each other to see how they're different. And then I talked about this last week, but I'll talk about again the ability to set up custom charts, which you'll then go on to use on custom dashboards, but I'll show how that works as well. Should I just keep going, Louise?
Yeah, just keep going. If any come in, I'll give you a nudge.
Okay, so annotations. So what we can do in annotations is we can make notes to ourselves about when important stuff happened. So funny enough, here's the annotation for the last webinar that I did on dashboards. So I'll add another one just so I can keep track of how many times I do this webinar. So let's do today, and let's call it some general note, and the note is webinar on measure. We'll make that visible to everyone. Okay, we'll add, I can't leave the notice empty. Okay, it's the webinar on measure. All right, so that's our annotation for today. And if we go back to the summary page, we can add these annotations. So we can just add them all if we want, and then update. And then we can see, let's make the date range a bit bigger. So in fact, let's just get rid of the date range. Just do everything. Okay. Need to get rid of that one too. So now we can see our annotations. This is all the data we have in our database for DeltaCrunch, and we can see all of our annotations here. So here was the last time I did the webinar on measure back in December, and here's the one we've done today. And then you can add anything you like here. You don't have to just have a line. You can have a range of dates which signify some interesting period that you want to make sure you remember and communicate back on the charts. And of course, you can use these on any of these charts, not just the summary page, but any of the other ones as well, which have dates on them.
So that be if there's a release of a new version, or you started working with a new acquisition channel, or something like that, I think. Yeah. So anything you like, really, any dates which are important to the game, you can make sure that you show on top of the charts so that you can compare periods that were meaningful. So that's annotations. Let's have a look at the cohort comparison. So what the cohort comparison lets you do is basically have two sets of filters. So I can say, maybe show me everyone from the last month. And then maybe I'll set this one up to be everyone from, say, December. Okay, and now I can choose any two charts I like. So maybe I'm interested in active users and new players. And this will show me a comparison between what happened, say, this month at the top and what happened last month. So I can quickly see if there's been some key changes, if the numbers have changed a lot, if there's some weekly variations that are interesting. You can quickly pick them up on the cohort comparison tool. You don't have to have just two cohorts. You can add as many as you like by just adding new cohorts, and these will just appear at the bottom. So now I can choose whatever I like, really, and that just allows me to have all the charts for different groups of filters and date ranges all on the one page. And of course you can put annotations there, and you can also use segments, and you can use different segments on the different charts if you like. You can use I can have engaged players here, and I can have spending players here, and so on. So the cohort comparison is quite good, but you can also get similar kind of functionality from using our new custom charts and custom dashboards. So I'll just go into custom charts quickly. I know I talked about this last week, but basically what our custom charts do is let you take any chart that we've seen today, any of the charts that appear in measure. So say say active users is fine. Let's just call this chart for webinar.
And then we can configure this any way we like. So say we'll take the previous 31 days, and then maybe we just want people that are on Android, say. Or let's just take all the Android guys. Okay, so now we can update that. So now we're just looking at our active users on Android. We can save that. And the idea, so this tool's quite good if you want to just take one chart and look at it on a big screen, and of course you can save it and really get a good look at it. But what it's designed for is for you to be able to use these charts on custom dashboards. So if we go back into our dashboards and say we go to the webinar dashboard that I produced last week, we can modify this dashboard. And we can see here is our saved measure chart that we just made. We can drag that in here. So now it's sitting there on the bottom of the one we made last week. We can save this. And we go back and have a look at it. And now you can see we have all of our things we're interested in. These are slice and dice queries that we did in the webinar last week. But we also have our custom charts down here that we can look at active spenders. And this is the one we just made. And the annotations are there because we had the annotations on the custom chart builder. And so you can see that you can do, in the same way you do cohort comparison, you could build your custom charts to populate this dashboard, and then they'll just be sitting there ready for you to look at whenever you log into the system. Okay, thanks everyone.